So, when I got married, my wedding dinner was at a random Applebee's restaurant off the side of Highway 101 in California, where no one, not our waiter, nor any of the diners, knew that we had just gotten married. Though my partner and I had meticulously planned our ceremony, our reception with a couple of hundred people just a few hours earlier, we had neglected to think about what would happen after we drove away from the cheering crowds and headed to our honeymoon destination. And so, we found ourselves hungry, with no dinner reservations on a Saturday night, still a couple of hours away from the hotel, waiting with everyone else in the lobby of Applebee's for a table. It was anticlimactic, to say the least, and not how either of us imagined we would feel after one of the most important events of our lives. Today's scripture, it has that kind of feel. It's the story which concludes the Gospel of John. It's post-Easter, and it's not what you would expect after the triumphant resurrection of Jesus from the grave. The story thus far, up to that point, had been full of intense drama, miracles, inspiration, betrayal, death, and then a victorious rising from the dead. Everything had changed because of Jesus. So where do we find the disciples immediately afterwards? They're fishing. Since fishing was a trade that they practiced before they met Jesus, it's not terribly surprising that this was the default habit they returned to. It seems a rather unremarkable scene, given all that had happened, and though it was anticlimactic, I think it also made sense. Maybe they needed a break from the roller coaster of emotions. After all, how exactly were they supposed to enact such a transformative and world-altering experience into their daily lives? So yeah, fishing, because at least it was familiar and it provided food. With Easter just a couple of weeks past, the end of the school year just a couple of weeks ahead, you're almost there, hang on, many of us are experiencing both huge and mundane events. From wrapping up research projects and upcoming graduations, to moving out and finding summer jobs, finding ways to live out the good news that Jesus is risen and God's love has prevailed, well, it may just seem a little beyond reach from our daily lives. Perhaps we still find ourselves feeling resentful or angry instead of gracious and forgiving. Maybe the unhealthy habits we resolve to give up during Lent are still our default, and those commitments remain just words. With final exams and papers coming fast and furious, who has energy or time to do anything else besides stay up too late, drink too much caffeine, and crawl your way to the finish line? While not enjoyable, I think for many of us, it is at least familiar. I imagine the disciples in the post-resurrection days felt similarly. No one could stay at that Easter-level passion for more than just a short period, because bills still needed to be paid, families fed, and jobs taken care of. Being the light of the world, as Jesus called them, felt like a distant and naive goal, not suited for the realities of everyday living. Which is why what happens next in the story is so comforting and encouraging. After spending a night fishing and catching absolutely nothing, the disciples were likely tired and frustrated. Even the skills they once had were not functioning properly, and they were hungry, not just for food, but something more. It is then that they realize they are not alone. Someone has been watching over them all along. After heeding the person's instructions to cast the net to the other side of the boat, and then nearly sinking because of the abundance of fish, they know immediately that it is Jesus. Once they arrive back on shore, he proceeds to feed them with the fish they have caught, and of course, a loaf of bread. And each bite and swallow is a reminder of how Jesus is still there with them. And then this really interesting lesson unfolds between Peter and Jesus. So remember, Peter, he was the disciple who so vehemently declared that he would die for Jesus. This is who Peter was. He was passionate. He said, I would die for you, only to be found hours later after that declaration denying that he even knew his Lord. Not once, but 3 times. 3 times after Jesus was arrested. If ever there was a disciple known for making rash resolutions, that would be Peter, who made grand proclamations and was often found wanting. To be fair, though, Jesus taught and asked a lot. I mean, Jesus asked for everything from his followers. Serve the needy, welcome the outcast, love your enemies, lay down your lives for the sake of your neighbor. Jesus asked a lot. I think this is important to keep in mind when we witness how Jesus then interacts with Peter. Scholars often conclude that Jesus asking Peter if he loves him 3 separate times, Mia read in that scripture, Jesus asked Peter 3 separate times, that is a symbolic restoration for the 3 times that Peter denied knowing Jesus. But there's something more here when we look closer. So first, you may have noticed that Jesus addresses him as Simon, son of John, which is the name that he was known by before he met Jesus. During their time together, Jesus renamed him Peter, a sort of vision casting of who Jesus was calling him to become. So to be called Simon again was a reminder that Jesus knew him from the beginning, before the radical call to discipleship and all that ensued. Second, the English translation of the word love here is all the same. It's just love, 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 every time you hear that word. But it's not the case in the Greek. So the first 2 times that Jesus asks Peter if he loves him, he uses the word agape. Perhaps you've heard that before, agape. And both times, Peter answers that he does love him, but with the word phileo. So they're different words. Agape is often understood as an unconditional love, the kind that Jesus demonstrated both by his teaching and his ministry of serving and laying down his life for others, even those considered enemies. Agape is godly love. Phileo, it's the kind of love and affection you find between family and friends. Genuine, for sure, but maybe a little more temperamental than agape. Sort of like Peter. So when Peter responds with phileo to the agape of Jesus, I think it is refreshingly honest. It is honest. It is an authentic admission of what he finds himself capable of, given the shit show that he had just gone through when Jesus was arrested. He loved Jesus, but he knew he had screwed up, and he was unsure if he was capable of the kind of love that Jesus was asking for. After asking him 2 times, no doubt sting to Peter's pride, the 3rd time, Jesus comes with a question that meets Peter where he is at. Instead of using the word agape, Jesus matches him with the word phileo. He doesn't say agape, he says phileo. He holds out the vision, the agape love that he's calling Peter into, while recognizing he is in the process of transformation from a love deeper than phileo. He is both Simon and Peter on the journey of becoming. And Jesus simultaneously walks with him where he is at and calls him forward into something more. What good news for us, fickle humans that we are, who aspire on our best days and our best moments to the agape love that God calls us to, while a moment afterwards starting to gossip about our roommate, choosing ourselves over our neighbor, or defaulting into cynicism rather than hope. We are fickle, and I think it is okay. It is okay that we are not capable of agape love and that we stumble, even backslide along the way. Jesus meets us where we are at, providing the grace of his meal for the immediacy of our hunger while encouraging us to live into something more. We do not need to make a giant leap of faith. It is enough to take just a tiny little step into becoming people of agape love. So, how might we do this? Author James Clear of the book Atomic Habits, have any of you heard of that book? If you haven't, it's worth a read. He's gained a lot of attention over the past few years for the framework that he has laid out about the path to true transformation. Many of us want to be transformed. One of the key insights from his work is that it is tiny, minuscule changes over a long period of time that have a huge compound impact. So if you just get 1% better, just 1% better at something every day for 1 year, you'll be 37 times better by the end of that year. So on a single day, 1% seems like nothing. But over the course of a year, 37 times is a huge amount. Much of the time, we're looking for something faster, more instant in our efforts to change. Generally means a bigger, flashier action. It's when we do those New Year's resolutions. I'm going to run a marathon, right? Which we could do, but over the long haul, it's the tiny ones. The small changes that are done repetitively over a long period of time, that's what actually brings about transformative change. And that's great, because on many days, I think 1% is all that we can muster. 1% is all that we can muster. The environment at UW-Madison can sometimes pressure folks into feeling like if they aren't performing at 110%, they're failing. And that sentiment, it can carry over into other areas of our lives, like relationships, our health, our faith. It can be overwhelming when we see the chasm between where we are, where we want to be, who we are, and who we want to be. When you think that if we cannot make a major change, it's not worth pursuing at all. But that is a false premise that does not actually bear out in practice. In reality, it is tiny habits, atomic in size, 1%, but over time, make a huge gargantuan impact. Those are the things that shape us into people capable of embodying the agape love and grace that Jesus calls us to become. It is what we see happen with Peter, who started out with a huge bang. Everybody knows who Peter was, but he quickly realized he could not sustain it. After the bold commitments he made to Jesus, right? I would die for you. And then the spectacular failure that followed, he totally abandoned Jesus. Peter was no longer so confident in his ability to be the person that Jesus was calling him to be. And that is how we find him post-resurrection, naked, hungry, on a fishing expedition that had produced exactly 0 fish. So Jesus calls him to shore, cooks up a meal, and feeds him. He reminds him of who he is becoming, and then meets Peter where he actually is at, dispensing atomic grace with each bite of bread and fish to both heal his wounds and strengthen him for the journey ahead. It is 1% at a time, just 1%. But we know with hindsight that 1% compounded over a lifetime into a remarkable legacy. Eventually, Peter did embody the agape love Jesus called him into as he became one of the early founders of the Christian church and faith. He fulfilled the vision that Jesus had cast when he renamed him. So at this point of the year, the finals, the end of the semester stress, that's inevitable. Living the good news of our risen Lord, well, it may feel like a stretch. But if we can identify just a small step to take, just 1%, that is enough. That is enough to begin the journey towards becoming people who live into the agape love that Jesus calls us into. So on your tables, you'll see little green cards. You can pick it up if you'd like. And on there is a verse from Galatians. It is the list of the fruit of the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit, which kind of help us think practically about what agape love looks like. In a moment, I'm going to give you a time of reflection, and I want you to just choose one fruit, you can circle it or underline it, that you want to focus on in the next couple of weeks. Just choose one, and then you're going to write down one small thing that you can do that represents that fruit. Perhaps you might choose joy and commit to smiling at just one person each day. Or you might choose generosity and commit to putting at least $1 aside until you're done with exams and giving that money away. It does not need to be a large, flashy action, for agape love is made up of repeated tiny acts of love, grace, and mercy that over time can transform the world. So take a few minutes, prayerfully consider what 1% commitment you can make in the next couple of weeks.